Hey everybody, I'm Jason and welcome back to From Tree to Lumber, a YouTube channel about a guy in a sawmill.
Well, these just arrived here by the sawmill. It's an interesting story. I was at the church bake sale a little while ago, and somehow the farmer down the road and his wife found out that I have a small sawmill, and they said, you know, we've got these two walnut logs that have been laying around forever, and either their son or one of their friends or son's friends or somebody was wondering if it could be cut up into lumber. So I took a look at it and I said, you know, I think so, but it's been sitting a while. We're gonna have to do a little bit of exploration before I can make any promises. So this is what I got. They are black walnut and have been sitting out for quite some time, and they're a pretty good size, which is going to be a small problem for me, although I don't think it's really that much of a problem. I'm just going to take my chainsaw and my ripping chain, and I'm just going to have to shave them down. I have a feeling that this rot probably only extends it a couple of inches, but you know, I'm pulling that out of the air and I really don't know. Well, there's only one way to find out, right? That seems to be my saying here at the sawmill, is there's only one way to find out, and that's what I'm going to do next.
I've decided to divide this into two videos to make things a little bit easier for me and to get some content out. So this is the smaller of the two logs, and I'm hoping it's going to give me a good idea of just how deep that rot is penetrated. This log is far from straight, there's lots of branching, and there's a great big crotch at the end, so I'm hoping for some fairly interesting grain patterns. The owner and I have talked, and he's okay with me cutting the logs in half to make them a lot easier for me to handle on my 18-inch sawmill. He doesn't need any long lengths and would be just happy to get anything useful out of them. I kind of think that will help him out by getting some better lumber, because they're both kind of unusually shaped, and trying to cut any kind of lengths out of them would probably result in a lot of waste anyway. Things are looking pretty promising after the first cut. There's some surprisingly deep cracks, but the heartwood seems to be solid, and the rot really does only go in a few inches. I should be able to work around all this and get some nice lumber out of the center.
Okay, here's the plan. So as far as I can tell, this rod here probably goes in a fair ways. So I'm going to take off like this portion here and some of that, because it's still just a little bit too wide for the sawmill. And that should leave me a reasonably flat surface to put onto the bunks. And then once I got it on there, I can kind of trim it, but I think it's going to be okay from there on in. I might have to take a little bit off the top and bottom, but we'll worry about that when the time comes. The first thing is just to cut, I think, this ear off and maybe a little bit of that one, but we'll cut it off and take some measurements and we'll see.
Yeah, that rot does go in a little bit deeper than it first appears on the outside. I don't think I'm going to cut any more off of this edge, though. I might be able to salvage some of the stuff around the rot. But what I have to do still is just cut a couple of pieces off the other side and the top to allow the sawmill to pass over it. I'm just going to make a quick visual check to make sure that the sawmill is actually going to pass over the log. Looks like I've got lots of room, so I'm not too worried about this. Sometimes if it's a bigger piece, I might take the blade out and just pass the thing over and make sure that it doesn't bounce anywhere.
All right, so here's the plan as it stands right now. So I'm going to cut down here a fair ways to get underneath this crack. This is probably This is probably all no good up here. If I can get a little bit out, I can get a little bit out later. But what I want to do is I want to make a cant. So these would be the sides. Once I get this trimmed up and that trimmed up, I will flip it one way or the other. I'll have to take a look at it. And then I'm going to take my cuts this way because I want to cut across that crotch to get as much, hopefully, you know, interesting swirl, figure, all that kind of stuff out of it as possible. These here will be 5/4, and I should be able to get 5 or 6 of them out of that. Just got to be careful of this little bit of rot on the edges. All right.
pretty happy with this first batch. The wood is actually quite dry and it's very hard. Still, I don't want to waste any time in sealing up the end grain. I'd like to keep the splitting to a minimum, especially with these short lengths. The second piece doesn't need as much trimming to fit on the sawmill as the one I did yesterday. There's a couple of protruding branches and one end is maybe just a little bit too wide for the carriage to pass it, so I'll just have to give it a little trim. My cutting strategy is pretty much the same as yesterday. That is avoiding the big cracks to get the best lumber I can while minimizing waste. I've also started today with a brand new blade, although the one I used yesterday wasn't really that old. This wood is pretty hard and, well, I think this is really taxing the sawmill, but it's getting through. This piece seems to have a lot more insect damage. I'm not sure if it's ants or just what's going on, but it's just something else I'm going to have to consider as I go through it. Yeah, this piece is turning into a little bit of a challenge, but well, we're going to get through it. So this bit of rot cuts in quite a ways, so it's really going to narrow this down a great deal, actually. And there's a great big split in it here that's also going to be a little bit of trouble. So unfortunately, I you know, we knew there'd be some waste. There's a big split down here too. I'm going to have to take this off right here. I'm going to have to just waste that that kind of 5-6 inches, which kind of sucks, but well, it's what we have to do.
Okay, so I've gotten down and now I'm starting to run into some rot, which is unfortunate, but you know, not a surprise. We're lucky to get what we're getting out of this, actually. So I think what I'm going to do is, the rot seems to be contained to this far edge and maybe just that end. I think I'm going to stand this up, rotate it 90 degrees, and then I'll take maybe 2 or 3 boards off of that. That's probably 4 or 4.5 inches wide down there. You know, we'll get something out of it. It won't be a complete waste. And then unfortunately, that over there is just gonna have to go.
Even with all its problems, I still managed to get some nice pieces out of this portion of the log. The wood looks to be absolutely beautiful with some really interesting grain patterns. What I've salvaged definitely is going to be usable, and I've decided to leave that last little bit of rot on the edges and on the ends just to allow him to cut out what he wants from it. In the next video, I will tackle the much larger and hopefully better log. It should be really interesting. Thank you very much for watching. If you've enjoyed this video, please take a second to hit the subscribe button.